Well, hello friends. I hope you are having a great day today, and I hope you're trusting and believing that God's going to do awesome things in your life today. Remember now, we serve a God. Psalms 23 said that He prepares a table for us in the very presence of our enemies. And the Bible went on to say that His goodness and His mercy will surely follow us all the days of our life. That's the God that we serve. That's the God that wants to bless us so bad. If we just follow His plan for our life, I'm telling you, there's nothing that God would not do for His people. Well, happy Friday to you. It's the end of the week. God's blessed us and kept us now. Let's go ahead and gather our faith around us, and let's go out of here and finish this week strong as we get ready to go into the weekend. Welcome to another edition of Take 5. Hey, well, this week we've been dealing with the subject, the law of consequences. I know it's kind of a peculiar sounding subject, but we've learned some stuff, I think, and we're going to learn some more next week as well as we go into this thing just a little bit deeper. Consequences are the things that happen as a result of a particular action. They are the aftermath, the after effect, the product, or the result of a decision to act. Consequences are the things in life that we just do not escape, the good and the bad, because consequences can be positive and they can be negative. But this law of consequences, it is what determines the good and the bad in our life. You don't have to have a devil to do that. And I told you earlier this week, I know there's a devil we have to deal with. I'm well aware of that. I understand that. But this law of consequences is where God gave us the right to choose. And while we have the right to choose, we are not free from the consequences of those decisions, whatever they may be. Now, when you just look at the definition of consequences, you learn that it can most definitely be positive and negative, and the Bible so says. In Deuteronomy 28 this week, we read where God said, if you obey the Lord, then all these blessings will come upon you. And there was about 12 verses there of blessings. Those blessings are the consequences of making right choices. But immediately at the end of that list of blessings, He said, but if you don't listen to what the Lord your God says, and if you don't obey all of His commands, then these bad things will happen to you. And then He gives a list of bad things for about 30 verses that are the result of choices we make that are just absolutely wrong. So we can see without a doubt that consequences can be positive, they can be negative. It's just so important that you and I make right choices. These consequences exist because they are the catalyst that God put in place to help us make right choices and to help us learn from the wrong ones that we make. If there were no such thing as consequences, there's no telling what we would do. There's no telling how many times we'd make the same foolish mistake over and over again if there were no such thing as consequences. When God introduced consequences, it was in the Garden of Eden. He was talking to Adam and Eve, telling them to stay away from that tree of knowledge of good and evil, that if they eat of it, such and such is going to happen. Eve did not listen. She partook of that fruit, and because of that, mankind still to this day is reaping the consequences of that one very act. Don't ever tell me that consequences aren't important, and don't ever tell me that consequences won't last for generations, because that consequence has lasted since the beginning of mankind as we know it. Now, when it comes to this idea of consequences, you'll find that there are Christians that will disagree with it. There are just some people, they just don't believe in this concept. And I think the problem that most Christians have today with the idea of negative consequences is that they want to believe that God's forgiveness and God's grace erases any consequences from the decisions that we make and from any sin. They'll say things like, well, those curses in Deuteronomy 28, they don't apply to us because we're under grace and we're not under the law. But those same people will turn right around and they will want to accept all of those blessings. You know where God says He'll make you the head and not the tail, above and not beneath and all of that. They want to receive the good, but they want to reject the bad. Now, I get that. I really do, because in my flesh, I don't want the bad. I want the good. And that's in you as well. But friend, you can't have one without the other. It's a law. And that's why we've named this thing such. So if God allows good things or blessing for right behavior, then you know that He will also allow these bad things for wrong behavior. If there are positive consequences for right decisions, then there are negative consequences for wrong decisions. And the idea of consequences has nothing to do with old covenant law or new covenant grace. It has nothing to do with that. This law of consequences is a divine law that transcends both. And as such, it cannot be altered. It just can't be changed. Now, we've seen the positive and negative consequences from the Old Covenant law there from Deuteronomy 28. But what does the New Covenant grace period, what does it have to say? It simplifies it into one verse. Paul said this in Galatians 6:7. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever one sows, he will also reap that. Did you catch that? Simplified into one verse. Don't be deceived. God's not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that's what he's going to reap. So when Paul says do not be deceived, he's telling us don't be fooled into misbelieving the truth. Don't be seduced like Eve into thinking that God does not mean what He says. Friend, He absolutely means what He says. And so Paul says, don't be deceived. Then he says, God is not mocked. When he says that, he's telling us that we can't laugh at or ridicule what God is saying as though it's improbable. Neither can we stop it, overthrow it, or alter this thing. We can't do it. So this is referring to a principle of a divine administration and means that we cannot treat this law of consequences with contempt, nor can we successfully avoid it. We just can't do that. He's telling these new covenant folks that they could not hope and they cannot allude to impose anything else on God. He's bound by His word, and He set this law of consequences in order. As a matter of fact, He set it in order in Genesis 8:22, where the Bible said, as long as the earth remains, there will be seed time and harvest. It will not cease. So that's the law that God put in order. It transcends law. It transcends grace. It goes past all of those things. It's God's way of administrating and superintending the good and the bad that's in our life that is linked to our choices. And so it's so important that we learn to make right choices in this life. Well, hey, next week, we're going to jump into the life of David, and we're going to dive pretty deep in there and look at some of the consequences that he had to deal with over mistakes he made with Bathsheba and committing adultery and committing murder and trying to deceive people and so on. We're going to learn some powerful stuff from the life of David. I'm telling you, this is really going to be good. Well, hey, I got to get out of here. It's been good being with you this week. I look forward to being with you on Monday's edition of Take 5. Until then, friend, hey, make sure that you make right decisions. There's this thing called the law of consequences, and it will determine what comes into your life by the decisions that you make. Have a great day.